up for you. So, Alexandria, would you like to say something about yourself and tell us a little bit about you?
Sure, absolutely. And actually, if you want to get the PowerPoint up as I'm talking about myself, I'm the manager for the behavioral health department. I've been with City of Hope for 14 years now. I predominantly work with our gynecological patients, and actually, I've kind of jumped around clinics with different staff changes too. So I work with some of our specialty cancers as well, and then fill in wherever the staff need me to. I also assist a lot with the sexual health program. So I'm very honored to be here because I know that, our patients get a lot of the focus, but we always tell our caregivers too that you have to take care of yourself in order to be able to help our patients. So I was thrilled when Carl asked me if I could do something for caring for the caregiver because I feel that sometimes you guys are forgotten and certainly not by intention, but a lot of the focus goes elsewhere. So as we had mentioned too, if you just want to hold your questions till the end, definitely we'll give time for that just for your privacy in case, there are any very personal questions. We don't want that in the recording for others. But certainly too, if, questions come up after this is done, you're more than welcome to reach out to Carl. I'm happy to, or Jenny, I'm happy to answer those, next week or whenever they might come up that way too. So if you want to move to the next slide, please. So I love this slide because it really shows the impact that stress has on our entire system. A lot of times when we think about stress, we think about, oh, my shoulders are really tight or my stomach is in knots, but we don't always realize that it impacts the body, mind, emotions, and behaviors. So this is a really just nice breakdown to show how all of those things are intertwined within ourselves. And also with that too, it's the importance of being able to regulate and recuperate from it. A lot of times too, people will say like, oh, stress is in my head, or it's just, I'm moving through this and I just have to power through and I'll think about all those other things afterwards. But we find too that if you have those recuperation tools, you can not necessarily have to power through, you can regulate and function a lot better too. And and I always tell people too that everyone can benefit from support. So I'm not an unbiased opinion, but since I am a therapist, I always tell people, you can reach out for, therapeutic support. A lot of times I've heard people say, well, therapy's for crazy people, or, stress is emotional and I'm not an emotional person. However, we know that when cancer comes into our lives, it's a form of trauma and it impacts our bodies and our relationships in whole different ways. And it's also biochemical. So when you're experiencing that stress in the moment, there's a cortisol release that takes over your entire system and it keeps you hyper alert. So, and it's not to say that it's a bad thing. Stress is good in certain circumstances. If you're in the middle of traffic, you want to have that level of stress to keep you alert and ready to find the person that's going to cut you off so you can react quickly. However, when we're in a constant state of stress, that's when it starts to wear our bodies down. A lot of the observations people have brought to me when they're noticing that shift in themselves is, nightmares or trouble sleeping, an increase in anxiety, feeling more emotionally raw. So I had one patient, or caregiver, sorry, that had called me up and, he was just so stressed, taking care of his wife, making sure that she got to all of her radiation appointments and he was making all the meals and cleaning the house and everything. And he's like, we were just sitting down on the couch watching a movie and this commercial came on TV and there were puppies in it. And I just started crying and I didn't understand why because I don't cry over puppies. And I said, well, that's your emotions. Like you're so emotionally raw right now that, things that don't typically impact you are having that drastic impact. You can go to the next slide, please. So when we look at burnout and compassion fatigue, burnout is that state of that physical, mental, emotional exhaustion. So that prolonged stress where, you just feel completely worn out. Compassion fatigue has those same components, that physical, mental, and emotional piece. However, it's a response to that interpersonal interaction with people that have experienced trauma. So when you're looking at, those that you're caring for, they're experiencing their own level of trauma dealing with the cancer. And we can very often start absorbing some of that as well. And it's really, just being overwhelmed too by, what people are telling you or experiencing, even if you're sitting in waiting rooms with other people and you're talking to other caregivers. It's, sharing those stories, which is wonderful. However, it's, making sure that in those moments too, you're going to hear me say this a lot, that you're regulating yourself so that you're not absorbing all of that. And you can move on to the next slide, please. So some of those warning signs of burnout are, those feelings of helplessness, being defeated or hopelessness, being disengaged, feeling chronically tired or drained, changes in appetite or sleep. Some people, when they're stressed, they completely lose their appetite, and others, they're stress eaters. And typically, when you're a stress eater, you're not going for the vegetables and the fruit. It's, the Twinkies, the Hostess aisle, those quick snack things, the chips, the things that aren't really helpful to you. And certainly maladaptive coping skills. So I've had a lot of people too say, okay, well, I used to smoke and then I started smoking more. Now I realize I'm up to 2 packs a day again. Or, well, I usually have a glass of wine to unwind. And, the other night I realized that I had the entire bottle. So it's recognizing those things too and how they don't serve you in a positive way. You can go to the next slide. So some of those signs of the compassion fatigue are, vicarious trauma. So as I was mentioning earlier too, kind of absorbing some of those experiences of others. I remember when 9/11 happened, I had quite a few patients that would come and talk to me and say, well, I wasn't even part of that, but when I watch those news things or even the recaps now for the anniversaries, it brings me to that moment where I can feel that pain and the trauma of all those people that are in there. And, that's the same thing too when you're talking with patients or caregivers and saying, okay, wow, like I know exactly what you're feeling. And you start absorbing all of that. And the main thing you want to not do is absorb that. So it's being able to hold almost like a little container for them to have that safe space to talk, but also giving yourself that boundary so that you're not absorbing all of that energy. You might also find too, your mood changes or your cognition is disrupted. So a lot of times, our memory isn't as sharp, or you're trying to reach for words or saying, "Wow, like this used to be really easy for me. This is a simple task, and I can't even do it right now." And that's a good sign too from your body saying, "Hey, you know what? I'm going through something right now." You might also find that you're a little bit more sarcastic. It's kind of that filter is taken off because you're just so exhausted that you're saying, all right, you know what? Like, I'm just going to say whatever I think or feel. And, sometimes it comes out in the wrong way, which can also be harmful to relationships. And of course, you have that exhaustion, sleeplessness. I've had a lot of people, especially caregivers, say, well, I'm getting like 2 to 4 hours of sleep a night. That should be good, where we know that you need a good solid 8 hours of uninterrupted sleep to really allow your body to do all of its repair work and recuperate. Next slide, please. So this is really a nice just little check-in for yourself to even as you look at these questions to see if you're in a state of burnout or compassion fatigue. What are your strengths and some of the challenges you're facing right now? How are you taking care of yourself? A lot of times when we think about self-care, I've had so many people say, well, that's really selfish. My loved one's going through all of this and I'm going to go for a walk. Like that doesn't seem right. However, as I mentioned before too, if you take care of yourself, you're better able to take care of them. So it's giving yourself that permission and saying it's not being selfish. It's, giving myself that love so I can fill my cup back up so that I can help my loved one going through this. And certainly, if you don't have anything in place for that self care, how do you want to take care of yourself? If there's an ideal situation, I had one caregiver say, I'd love to have a spa day. Like, I just want to go get a massage, get a facial, get a manicure, pedicure, all these things. But she said, I'm not going to do that because, my husband, he needs me. And I said, well, what is he doing right now? And she's like, well, he's out working in the yard. And I said, okay, well, if he's out working in the yard, he has your phone number. Like, if he's going to be out there for, an hour or so, like, do you think you can go get, a 20-minute massage and, have someone, a neighbor, check in with him if that helps put your mind to ease. But it's making sure that you get those breaks too. Because a lot of times, we're so committed to that caregiver role that we forget that, our patients are still able to do things on their own too. So it's giving them that space and saying, okay, well, you know what? You're working in your tool shed right now. You're working on your crafts, whatever it might be. Oh, you have your space right now. Maybe I can take a little bit of space for myself too, and we can reconnect in a little bit of time. Can you go to the next slide, please? So the ABCs of prevention, we look at, awareness, balance, and connections. So awareness is really that idea of mindfulness, and that is being fully present in the moment. So it's, even like right now, it's thinking, okay, how am I sitting in this chair? Do I have more weight on the right side of my body versus my left? Do my feet feel like they're planted on the ground, or do I feel a little disconnected? How is my breathing? Is it smooth and calm, or do I feel like it's almost labored or stuck in my chest? So it's all those different signs of yourself in the room. And even too, orientating yourself, saying, okay, what do I see around me? What color are the walls? What does it look like outside? What noises do I hear? So even going through your five senses can just help bring you back to the present moment. And that's a nice way to just ground and recuperate, especially if you're feeling overwhelmed. Balance, that's, setting boundaries, being able to say no or not right now. I mean, we certainly, especially when we're caregivers, we want to help everyone and anyone. And, that can be really difficult too. And we have to realize our own limitations. If we're used to doing 10,000 things in a day, and now we've added on a major task of helping someone through their cancer journey, we may not be able to do 10,000 things. It might be 5,000. And it's saying, okay, I kind of have to triage this and pick what's the most important thing on this list so that I'm not burning myself out. I'm still present and I can still accomplish the things that need to be done. And certainly connections too. It's those healthy relationships. I've had quite a few, caregivers and patients say, we have so much support around us and it's great. We do also have some people that, every time we talk to them, they just kind of bring us down, or they always give us the worst case scenario, or it's, oh, I knew someone with cancer and they died. Or, I knew a caregiver and, they spent so much time taking care of someone that they ended up getting cancer too. It's those things that aren't really helpful for you to move through an already stressful role. So it is, saying, okay, well, maybe I'm going to limit my time when I talk to this person. Or I've had some people say, you know what, I had to just kind of end that relationship and it was really hard. And it's especially hard when it's a family member, it's a sibling or, that aunt or uncle or somebody that, has been present. But it's saying, okay, well, right now we need to focus on, the healing, that role that we have and surrounding ourselves with people and things that are going to nurture us. If you can go to the next slide. So I do have a short video that kind of talks about stress and the impact on the brain. So just give us a minute. Carl's got to switch screens that he's sharing.
Can you see it?
Yep, we can see it. And you can actually,
Are you sleeping restlessly, feeling irritable or moody, forgetting little things, and feeling overwhelmed and isolated? Don't worry, we've all been there. You're probably just stressed out. Stress isn't always a bad thing. It can be handy for a burst of extra energy and focus, like when you're playing a competitive sport or have to speak in public. But when it's continuous, the kind most of us face day in and day out, it actually begins to change your brain. Chronic stress, like being overworked or having arguments at home, can affect brain size, its structure, and how it functions, right down to the level of your genes. Stress begins with something called the hypothalamus pituitary adrenal axis, a series of interactions between endocrine glands in the brain and on the kidney, which controls your body's reaction to stress. When your brain detects a stressful situation, your HPA axis is instantly activated and releases a hormone called cortisol, which primes your body for instant action. But high levels of cortisol over long periods of time wreak havoc on your brain. For example, chronic stress increases the activity level and number of neural connections in the amygdala, your brain's fear center. And as levels of cortisol rise, electric signals in your hippocampus, the part of the brain associated with learning, memories, and stress control, deteriorate. The hippocampus also inhibits the activity of the HPA axis, so when it weakens, so does your ability to control your stress. That's not all though. Cortisol can literally cause your brain to shrink in size. Too much of it results in the loss of synaptic connections between neurons and the shrinking of your prefrontal cortex, the part of your brain that regulates behaviors like concentration, decision-making, judgment, and social interaction. It also leads to fewer new brain cells being made in the hippocampus. This means chronic stress might make it harder for you to learn and remember things, and also set the stage for more serious mental problems like depression and eventually Alzheimer's disease. The effects of stress may filter right down to your brain's DNA. An experiment showed that the amount of nurturing a mother rat provides its newborn baby plays a part in determining how that baby responds to stress later in life. The pups of nurturing moms turned out less sensitive to stress because their brains developed more cortisol receptors, which stick to cortisol and dampen the stress response. The pups of negligent moms had the opposite outcome, and so became more sensitive to stress throughout life. These are considered epigenetic changes, meaning that they affect which genes are expressed without directly changing the genetic code. And these changes can be reversed if the moms are swapped. But there's a surprising result. The epigenetic changes caused by one single mother rat were passed down to many generations of rats after her. In other words, the results of these actions were inheritable. It's not all bad news though. There are many ways to reverse what cortisol does to your stressed brain. The most powerful weapons are exercise and meditation, which involves breathing deeply and being aware and focused on your surroundings. Both of these activities decrease your stress and increase the size of the hippocampus, thereby improving your memory. So don't feel defeated by the pressures of daily life. Get in control of your stress before it takes control of you.
All right. So if you can switch back to the other slides, I love that video because it really breaks down even just on that scientific level. I know I talked a little bit about some of those things, but even just seeing how it really impacts your brain and your relationships and how like they said, that's something that can be passed on. And even when we look at relationships, there's a theory of like the nature versus nurture and how all of those things impact us. And uh, and then also too, how we can teach these skills. So I always, tell our caregivers, especially if you have young people in the house, usually not teenagers. Teenagers, are kind of doing their own thing. But if you've got, I don't know, like 3 to like 11-year-olds, maybe a little bit older, put them in charge of doing self-care activities in the house. So, and that can be, just a quick meditation that you do before dinner, or you go for a walk or a scavenger hunt outside. Zen Den are 5-minute meditations on YouTube geared towards kids. And I always say, if you put the kids in charge of that, if you have, two in the house, one gets the even days, one gets the odd days, they're going to say, all right, this is my special task to help out. And, everyone in the house is going to say, okay, let's do this versus, saying, no, I'm not going to let this 3-year-old down and I'm going to go and wash the dishes instead. So it's just a nice way to bring the family together also. So if you can go to the next slide, please. So these are some tips for coping and recuperating from that stress. Of course, seeking support. If you're working, there should be a employee assistance program, hopefully at your job, or even seeking out counseling. There's a lot of telemedicine now too. Using, technology to stay connected to family and friends. So there's a lot of people that do Zoom meetings, or I think there's like FaceTime, the Facebook portal, and all those other ways too. I know my brother and his family actually live in Florida, so during COVID, my parents were at their house, I was at mine, and my brother and his kids were at home, and we set up game nights. So we'd all pull out our own Candyland board game because that was my niece's favorite game. And we would move the pieces and play, even though we were in 3 different households. But that was just a nice way to stay connected and have some downtime with each other too. So adopting daily habits that you do. I always tell people utilize those self-care things when you don't need them, because when you're in those moments of stress, that's really when your body needs it. And if you're trying to teach yourself something new, it's actually going to cause more stress than than be helpful. uh, be creative. A lot of times, we move away from, the art and dancing and singing and music and all of those things stimulate a different part of our brain. Typically when we're moving throughout our day, we're in that logic center where we're going through all of our to-do lists. But if you can move into that creative space where you are, listening to music, doing a dance party in your kitchen, even like adult coloring books, things like that really helps to take the pressure off that logical reasoning brain, and it allows that relaxation piece to come into play. And that's the brain that we use when we're kids. You hand them a cardboard box and all of a sudden they're going to the moon. So that's really being able to tap into that piece. Gratitude journals. I actually have a lot of my clients do those just because, we move throughout the day so much, and it's like, oh, there's so much piling on top of me. I don't really think about, the good things that happened. So the gratitude journal, I have people just put it on their nightstand, and right before you go to sleep, you write down 3 things that happened that day that you're grateful for. And it doesn't have to be anything extraordinary. It can be, I had a refreshing glass of water. A stranger smiled at me and it just lit up my day. My partner got great news about their cancer journey, whatever it might be. And those are things that, you're going to fall asleep thinking about, which will also bring you into a more relaxed state to help you sleep better versus, oh, I forgot to, do those 10 things on that to-do list. And I have all these other worries, which is going to keep you up tossing and turning. It also helps too if you are having one of those really rough days, or, feeling a little bit more, sensitive or hard on ourselves. I think we're all guilty of that self-judgment every once in a while, thinking I'm not doing enough, or, I should be better at something. And being able to look at that gratitude journal and just say, okay, well, these are all really great things that happened in my life. These are all different blessings that I've had, can really help to shift that mood also. And certainly to actively grieving losses. This is a huge piece, and I think it's something that we often forget about. When we have major stressors and traumas in our life, it disrupts everything. There's, a lot of, events that we're not able to attend, or, things that change. Even, when you're caring for someone, the dynamics of your relationship might change, where you're watching someone you love who's very active, who's now in a wheelchair or needs assistance to go to the bathroom. And it's kind of grieving that loss too of, when we got married, we said we were going to grow old together. And, I feel like my partner has aged a lot quicker than I have just because of the disease. So it's things like that where you can take that step back and kind of grieve those changes and say, All right, this is, a loss that we're both experiencing and it's impacting us in different ways. If you can go to the next slide. So some of those wellness practices, like I had mentioned, going to counseling or therapy, meditation, even self-massage. If you can't really get out of the house, there's different pressure points. Even if you massage your hands and your feet, it can help alleviate a lot of stress in your body. Even too, I have people rub their earlobes. You do that for about a minute and it helps to release the tension in your neck and it actually increases the range of motion for you. I know I mentioned arts and crafts, bubble bath. Deep breathing is something I always say. I know it sounds cliche because people are always like, oh, take a deep breath. But, if you go back even thinking about that video and they were talking about that overabundance of cortisol being released into your body, when you take that deep breath, you're really using your diaphragm or that abdominal breathing, and that puts pressure on the vagus nerve, which is the one that releases cortisol to your brain in times of stress. So when it puts that pressure on there, it shuts off that cortisol release, and your brain instantly says, oh, I don't have to be on alert anymore. I'm not stressed, I'm calm. And it'll have that calming ripple effect throughout your body. And that's one thing I always tell people, like try doing that deep breathing when you feel calm so that your body's used to it. Because when you're in those times of stress or, you can feel your anxiety increasing, you can take that deep breath and it might not be completely deep in the initial moment. It might take a couple breaths, but your body will already be used to it and it'll say, oh, okay, I know how to get there. I can get to that relaxed state. And now everything can calm down and I can concentrate better. If you can go to the next slide, please. So the healthy mind platter is, you know, the things that your body, your brain needs for functioning. So if you've ever talked with a nutritionist, they'll talk to you about eating the rainbow. Well, this is the rainbow for your mind. And actually, if you go to the next slide, there are little descriptions of, everything too. So, that focus time, that's kind of going back into that mindfulness, being able to be present in the moment. The playtime, it is, taking those moments to tap into that creativity, that, cardboard box to the moon feeling. I had a patient once that she had to grow up very quickly. Her parents got divorced at a very young age, and she was 10 and she went to live with her dad and she was cleaning and cooking and doing all the household stuff. So she didn't really have a childhood. And then her little brother ended up moving in with them a couple years later and she raised him. And she was sitting across from me and she said, I don't understand why my grandkids keep asking me to go outside and play with them. And she's like, I've got things to do. I'm doing the dishes and, I've got to clean the house. And, and I talked to her a little bit more and I said, well, they just want to connect with you in that way. And she was looking outside and our consultation room at the time overlooked the pond that we have in the back of the hospital. And there's always 1,000 geese out there. And she looks at me and she's like, I kind of want to chase the geese around. And I took that as a moment of, okay, let's do this. So I took her outside and we walked out by the pond. And I said, well, geese can be pretty mean and they might bite. So you have to be careful. And she's like, well, I don't really know how to run after them. I'm like, well, run after them like your grandkids would. She's like, what does that look like? So I just start running, flailing my arms and legs around, like looking completely ridiculous. And she followed me and she was chasing the geese at a good distance. And the next time I saw her, she was just bursting with energy and excitement. And she sat down in the chair and I looked at her and I said, well, what's going on? She goes, guess what I did? And I said, I don't know. What did you do? She said, I ran after my grandchildren outside and I did not do the dishes. So it's, giving yourself that permission to let go and have fun and, connect with, the people that you love and, making sure that you're getting enough you know, physical exercise, and it doesn't mean having to go to the gym. It could be going for a walk, or doing, chair yoga, different things that just get the blood flow going and moving for you. And certainly too, making sure you have adequate sleep. And like I mentioned before too, that's really where our body does all of its greatest repair work. on a cellular level, your cells are rejuvenating and your immune system's rebuilding when you're in that sleep state. So it is making sure that you're giving your body that time that it needs, and having good routines prior to going to bed if you have a hard time. We always tell people shut off all the electronics, including your phone, the iPads, the computers, TVs, all of that a half hour before you go to sleep, because those lights and the sounds keep your brain stimulated and active. So if you're able to cut all of that out and start focusing on yourself, maybe that's the time where you do some prayer or meditation to help reconnect with yourself. Your gratitude journal also, so that you can go to sleep with a little bit more peace. If you go to the next slide. So these are some just quick self-care techniques because I know everyone is busy. The thymus tap, the thymus is a little gland kind of right by where your collarbones meet. And if you just tap it very gently, it's a way to stimulate the T cells in your immune system. So I actually have one caregiver who's a bus driver, and during flu and cold season, he always says, the first time I hear a kid sneeze, like I'm tapping that thalamus just to get the immune system boosted up a little bit. But that can be a meditation too. If you're sitting at a red light, you can easily tap your thalamus a little bit and help calm yourself down. Definitely, if you're in traffic too, it helps to focus that way versus all the honking and everything else. The quick coherence technique, that is actually from heart math. So they actually study the relationship between your breathing and your heart rate. And this is a very simple technique where you just place one hand on your heart and just start, focusing on your breath that way. And then you bring to mind a person, a place, something that brings you peace. And it's been proven that that just helps to sync everything up and bring you back to a state of equilibrium. And then the ear massage. I know I mentioned that a little earlier too. A nice way to test this out also is if you turn and look over your right shoulder to see how far you can see, and then do the same on your left, and then rub your earlobes for about 30 seconds to a minute, and then repeat, and you'll see that your range of motion has increased. And next slide. I think that's the end. So I can have Jenny